Welcome to our Global Voice in Transition series, where we'll be exploring key research findings from AVOXI and Metrigy's annual State of International Voice for the Contact Center report. Each session draws on insights from IT and CX leaders across 10 countries and 16 industries. We'll explore the trends and challenges that are shaping enterprise voice strategies. I'm Michelle Grenz, Senior Product Marketing Manager at AVOXI, and I'll be moderating our discussion today. Before we get started, let me briefly introduce our expert speakers and their companies. First, we have Barbara Dondiego, our CEO here at AVOXI. Joining Barbara, we have Robin Gareiss, CEO and Principal Analyst for Metrigy. Barbara brings over 25 years of experience in global communications. Under her leadership over the last 9 years, AVOXI has transformed from an international systems integrator to a global enterprise software platform. She has previously held leadership roles at Fairpoint, Earthlink, and Level 3. Robin has more than 25 years of experience advising senior IT executives on how they can transform their businesses. She is also a widely recognized expert with a focus on communications, contact center, and AI. She's a regular speaker at communications events and writes a blog for No Jitter. Barbara, Robin, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Now, a quick introduction of AVOXI and Metrigy. AVOXI delivers next-generation cloud voice solutions for global businesses. Our software gives companies automation, visibility, and intelligence to manage mission-critical voice communications worldwide. With unmatched service and virtual numbers in 150-plus countries, we serve the more than 5,000 enterprises using voice to better serve their customers. Metrigy is a research and advisory firm that helps companies navigate change in workplace collaboration, customer and employee experience, and digital transformation. Backed by in-depth research and analysis, Metrigy provides practical insights and guidance that technology providers and enterprise leaders can use to make smarter decisions and drive results. All right, let's dive in. As I mentioned, today's discussion will cover data and insights from AVOXI's recent State of International Voice for the Contact Center report, developed in collaboration with Metrigy. The research surveyed 365 voice and telecom decision makers on topics, trends, and challenges in the world of international voice. In today's session, we'll talk about the platforms at the core of customer and employee communications, CCaaS and UCaaS. We'll look at how organizations that are deploying these platforms, what drives satisfaction, and how voice purchasing is influenced relative to CCaaS and UCaaS decisions. Now, on our first topic, nearly every enterprise is using CCaaS or UCaaS today, but how they deploy them tells a bigger story. One of the big takeaways from the data is that hybrid deployment models continue to dominate in CCaaS. Nearly half of organizations are blending cloud and on-prem systems, while just over a third are fully cloud-based. This shows that while cloud adoption is strong, hybrid remains the most common approach. Robin, I have a question for you. Do you see hybrid as a transitional phase toward fully cloud, or will it remain the norm for many enterprises?
Yes. That's one of those ones that kind of depends on the company. Yeah, I would say most are in a hybrid deployment as they move from on-prem to cloud. However, the amount of time it takes them to move from on-prem to cloud could be years. So it kind of looks like that's their So we recently did some research. I just released a study just independently from what we did here. And we looked at companies who were in a hybrid environment and asked them, like, when do you think you'll fully move to the cloud? Only 7.5% said that they would never move to the cloud fully. But a lot, 70% plan to do so by 2028. So within the next couple of years, I think we're going to be seeing a big shift toward the cloud. About 22%, said sometime later than 2028 or later. So now that said, a lot of companies will oftentimes say they're going to do something, then it gets deprioritized. But that's where they are now. I'd say some companies like having that on-prem architecture at headquarters with cloud services at the remote locations, especially globally. It kind of gives them a mix of, management, outsourced management, almost like in the remote locations, like somebody else is dealing with that, but I have control at the headquarters. A lot of what we see in the CCaaS world, or I should say just the contact center world, is that there are people who've been there for a long time and they feel that there's a lot of customization and there's no way they can move it to the cloud. Typically, the trigger is a new leader comes in and says, yes, we can move this to the cloud. And if you're not going to do it, we'll find someone who will, and then they end up moving it to the cloud. So a lot of it is really people as opposed to any sort of technology problem that's preventing them from going to the cloud.
Yeah. Mhm,
And
mhm.
sometimes their budget too. If they only have so many dollars to actually,
Yeah,
to dedicate to moving it, and it's a move, sometimes it's a different place in your financial statements, whether you have an on-prem or physical
that's
system,
right. That's right.
cloud-based system. So it's really going through that evolution also on the financial side. And sometimes that'll cause things like maybe your backup call center or your smaller call center or your more back office focused call center might stay on-prem for quite a while, depending on how your financial position is.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Makes sense. Well, Barbara, what advantages or risks come with running hybrid models that leaders should keep in mind, especially considering this is going to be the reality, at least in the short term?
Yeah, I mean, advantages and risks. So I think the risk is that you just have to deal with two different things, right? And they have different, like, if you're in the cloud, one beautiful thing about the cloud is typically you get the next new release automatically all the time. So you're always on the current version if you're in a cloud world. If you're in a physical world, you're sort of frozen in time typically, unless you pay extra money. And even then, they might not be developing on that platform anymore. It might be end of life. You might have to be, it just depends on the situation. So, you're in two very different operating models, and you just have to work with those. So that's a risk. I think the advantage is, it depends on what you want to invest your money in. So we have customers who have things that they've left on-prem. They might leave on-prem for another 10 or 15 years because it's not strategic to them. They feel like they can manage it. It's not that complicated of a deployment. They're going to leave it as is, and they're going to invest their money in some new technologies for maybe their higher revenue clients that are served by a different type of center, a different type of technology. So I think those are probably the sum that probably sums it up. One good thing is you can find a platform like in the AVOXI platform. We can work with we can integrate into systems that are on-prem. We can integrate into systems that are in the cloud. We can do both sides. We can do things that are IP based. We can do integrations in a non-IP model. Because what you want to do is have control over where you're routing your client and be able to route your client, to the best place that can most efficiently answer their question and solve their problem, take their sale. So I think that's an opportunity there as well.
Great, thanks. Well, let's dive a little deeper into this momentum toward cloud-based voice. So today, about 54% of contact center calls are handled in the cloud, so the calls themselves, and 47% on-prem. Looking 3 years ahead, we'll see incremental growth up to 56% cloud, but on-prem remains a sizable piece. So that means enterprises will need voice infrastructure that can support both environments for the foreseeable future. So to sum up what I'm hearing both of you say, today we know about 54% of contact center calls are handled in the cloud and 47% on-prem. And looking 3 years ahead, we'll see incremental growth up to 56% in cloud. But the takeaway is really on-prem remains a sizable piece. And to reiterate what both you, Barbara, and Robin have said, enterprises will need voice infrastructure that can support both environments for the foreseeable future. When we asked companies what drives satisfaction with their CCaaS platforms, two things stood out: call quality and reliability. 40% pointed to call quality, and nearly the same, 39%, highlighted reliability and uptime. These findings underscore how critical voice performance is to customer engagement worldwide. It's not just about features or integrations. It's about whether the call itself is clear, consistent, and dependable. Barbara, have you seen organizations underestimate the importance of call quality until it becomes a problem? And what's the impact if they do?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think people. So, I think people underestimate that. I think if you're, if you're in the United States, you're just going to assume that your call is going to work fine, because it pretty much does here. I mean, really, truly, it pretty much does here most of the time. But if you start to then connect other calls together in different countries, you're going to have different types of infrastructure and different quality, and that can really, be a problem for your overall customer experience. So I do see that underestimated. I think that it can really have very, very negative effects, and it becomes sort of like a panic for the contact center, because if you're trying to open up a market, say you're opening up Vietnam or Japan, and all of a sudden your voice channel doesn't work in that country, that's going to be a huge issue for your contact center workers and also for your overall CX strategy.
Great. Robin, I have a question for you, which is beyond quality and uptime. What other elements do you see influencing customer satisfaction with their CCaaS platforms?
Integration. I think integration is a huge one as we move forward with just growing numbers of options for technologies, growing number of AI applications that you're going to want to add in, just to your overall platform. I think that integration is something I hear about all the time from enterprise organizations. I would also say that the AI and analytics capabilities are something that are important when it comes to customer satisfaction, because AI is so tightly entrenched into customer service and everything we do in interacting with customers. So I think that's something that I think companies should be asking their providers, like, what are you doing in this space?
Mm-hmm.
I think for growing companies, certainly scalability and support become more important, because they don't want to be held back in their overall business growth and business development by a provider that isn't in a country they're expanding to, for example, or that can't provide the support that they need somewhere. So that's, I think, a big one, especially if you're planning that rapid growth. And then the other thing I think I would call out is security and compliance. It's very, very important, and increasingly more so as the bad actors get better at what they do.
Right. Well, another important piece of the research looks at how enterprises purchase voice services for their contact centers today. The findings show that contact center providers are the most widely used. So about 65% of organizations rely on them, either fully or alongside other vendors. And this tells us that voice and contact center software purchasing are still very closely linked. In other words, many enterprises expect their CCaaS provider to also deliver voice, not just the platform itself. One of the most striking findings in the research, however, is that provider preferences are on the move. Within the next 1 or 2 years, 71% of companies expect to change their preferred provider type. The main reasons are better global coverage and higher service quality, areas where enterprises clearly feel their current providers aren't delivering. And when we look at where companies are headed, nearly 40% expect to move to a specialty global voice provider, a higher share than those sticking with CCaaS providers, carriers, or APIs. Robin, why do you think so many enterprises are preparing to change their primary provider type now?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some cases, it's kind of an acknowledgement that the CCaaS providers, and even the global carriers don't have the same expertise and value that a specialty global voice provider has. I think when you look at CCaaS providers, what do? They specialize in the contact center, the software, the applications, things like that, versus global voice connectivity. Can they offer it? Yeah, sure, but not with the same level of sophistication that a specialty provider can. I also think that as we move forward, technology, connectivity, the quality of it all really does become a competitive edge. As more and more people rely on technology interactions with customers over whether it's voice, text, video, whatever it might be, the quality of that experience becomes a competitive edge. It gives you, potential to make more money. It gives you potential to cut your costs, to get better ratings on different online sites and things like that. So I do think you can't really underestimate the competitive edge as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a question for both of you. Do you see this shift as a short-term correction or a longer-term realignment of how enterprises are thinking about voice? Barbara, maybe you can start.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, AVOXI, we would put ourselves in the specialty voice provider category. That's really what we focus on, and we deliver that in a modern way through software. So we were really glad when we saw that the survey put us that we're show these results, which is also what we feel when we are working with enterprises around the world that are experiencing certain challenges, not having as much control as they would like over their voice channel. So I do think that that's going to continue to evolve. And I do think that I foresee that as instead of like a sort of short-term correction, I feel like that's going to be, a future path into how these services are going to be delivered going forward, just because it has to be that way. So that you can really have the integrations you need, the quality that you need, the transparency that you need, and this ever increasing expectation that customers have to be able to, reach whoever they're buying a service from in a fast, efficient, and effective way.
Yeah, and I think that companies might start this off as thinking it's like some sort of a short-term correction, but I don't think they're going to shift back.
Right.
Once
Yeah.
they
Which makes it
move,
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's like once they move into like a specialty provider, they're going to see the value and the difference. So I think then it becomes more of a long-term realignment if it wasn't from the start. There could be
Because that's
companies
the
where it's
expectation. Yeah. The market expectation will evolve to that.
Mhm.
yeah, exactly. And I just think that this is especially true given the importance of voice in customer interactions. I'm going to give you a couple data points that I just got that are just so compelling. 82% of all customer interactions use voice either initially or as an escalation from a digital channel. 82%. That's up from 77% last year. So voice is not going away. So I have to say that because you hear that all the time, like, oh, everything's going to digital. I'm like, no, when you ask consumers, that's their preferred way to communicate is voice. Now, sometimes they're going to need to type. If they're in the office and they need to deal with something, they don't want someone to hear their call, they're going to type. But if I'm in a car, my preference is to talk. But in general, if I could do either or, most people would prefer to talk. That said, all voice right now, though, is not human voice, and it won't be moving forward only be human voice, right? I think generative AI has gotten so much better that our voice AI agents are pretty decent now. And I think the voice AI agents are showing a lot of success and acceptance among consumers. So I think, voice may be human, it may be AI, but it's still voice nonetheless, and you still need that quality.
Absolutely agree. We're seeing that everywhere. And one of our customers was telling me that he's actually seeing a re-engagement of clients with different companies because of this opening up of the voice channel. They don't really care. They like interacting with the machines because it actually is now a delightful experience versus like press 1, press 5, press 10, whatever, versus those giant menu options, which are so terrible. Just if you can just speak into a device, this is a great natural language processing device right here. You can speak into that device and then connect with whether it's a human assisted by a human or a machine that can answer your question, solve your problem quickly and effortlessly. That's what you're going to want to be doing.
Yeah, I think moving forward, one of my predictions for an upcoming presentation I'm doing is that by 2030, I don't think we're going to see any more IVRs because I think AI is going to take over that. Already in our research success group, about 63% of them are already replacing IVRs with basically AI triage agents or AIV or IVAs.
It's an agentic IVR. The job is the IVR.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yep.
Right.
Great. Well, before we move into UCaaS, what final parting advice would you each give to enterprises evaluating whether to stay with their current provider type or move primarily to a specialty voice provider? Robin.
Yeah, I mean, I can jump into that. I mean, I just think that some of the value add that you get from a specialty voice provider is absolutely worth at least trying it. Just go ahead and try it. Like if it's something where you're thinking, oh, I'm not going to move this whole thing. I'm not going to move my whole infrastructure over. I get that. I get that concern. I get that, you've been with a provider for a long time. You don't want to change. I would say just pick an area, try it, see what you think. And then it's kind of up to the specialty providers to prove their value and prove their worth. I think it's absolutely worth trying it. And then my opinion is that once you try it, you're probably going to see that value and continue to migrate more locations over.
100%. I mean, we would love at AVOXI, we love to do pilots. We love to do proofs of concept. We don't charge for those because we want you to experience what this new world is. It's not the same as the old legacy, manual, terrible telecom world. This is the software-driven voice world that we are creating here. So, we love that, and we would definitely recommend. We also say if someone won't trial it for you, won't pilot it for you, won't proof of concept it with you, it's probably not going to be the provider for you then.
All right, thank you. Now let's transition into the unified communications data and how it compares to the satisfaction and purchasing decisions we just talked about for CCaaS.
Yeah.
All right, we've seen hybrid models dominate in CCaaS, and the same trend is true for UCaaS. Nearly half of organizations use a hybrid UC model, 2/3 still maintain some level of on-prem infrastructure, and more than 80% have UCaaS in their environment. This shows while cloud adoption is strong, again, hybrid remains the reality for most enterprises. Many are moving toward the cloud, but they continue to keep on-prem systems for legacy compatibility, regulatory requirements, or other specific business needs. Barbara, can you talk about what are some of the main reasons organizations keep those on-prem infrastructures in place?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the same as they do for CCaaS, right? It's just, they only have, so if you have a really large global organization, maybe you have 100,000 employees, you're going to be moving those folks over in some type of a schedule onto whatever cloud solution you're moving over. You're going to want to make sure you have the budget. You want to make sure you have the time. It can be somewhat disruptive. You want to make sure you have, the right regulatory approval to do it, depending on what country you're in and how that setup is. So all those factors play into these longer timelines to migrate. And like with some of the things we said on cloud for CCaaS, I mean, you might have some folks that are like, you know what? They're fine where they are. These certain countries, these smaller teams, they're going to just stay where they are for a while. We feel comfortable operating that the way we're operating it, and then we're going to focus on maybe larger deployment. So I think it's similar.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Robin, do you expect UCaaS to follow a similar trajectory as CCaaS as far as hybrid being kind of the long-term reality for many?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Barbara just said. I mean, I think we're going to see this for a little while. That said, I do think that in most companies, they're going to move UC a little bit more quickly into a cloud service compared to contact center, because there are fewer customized applications that they have to factor moving in. Contact center, so for people who've been on premises for a long time, there's a lot of customization built into there. And also, I think, we're a little bit slower usually in moving anything customer facing, because, one problem can have a real lasting consequence, whereas internal communications and collaboration is a little bit more forgiving. Now, so I also think this is an area where companies can consolidate and not worry about managing two different platforms and management platforms, for example, or I should say like two different interfaces and management platforms.
Right.
Really what I'm thinking there. But I think hybrid's a good interim solution for them. Now that said, the other thing that I have seen with some companies is that UC does get a little deprioritized because contact center is more important. Like, we want to get our contact center, everything solved there first. So let's really focus all of our resources on contact center and just keep UC, in a hybrid environment until we can get to it, kind of thing. So there's two different ways that companies can go with that.
Yep. And I think some of the hybrid that we also see is more about multiple cloud UC versions happening, depending on if there's an acquisition or if there happens to be a contract in place. And so maybe certain teams might be on Zoom and other teams might be on Microsoft Teams. And so moving to one is a goal for sure. But that might be a scenario companies are using for a while as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, when it comes to UCaaS, we saw that the top factors influencing provider satisfaction look very similar to CCaaS. It's integration capabilities, reliability and uptime, and global reach as the leading criteria, each cited by around 40% of respondents. One difference, though, is that call quality ranks as relatively lower priority for UCaaS than for CCaaS. And that kind of makes sense, because in the contact center, every call directly impacts customer experience and sales. And in UCaaS, most of the interactions are internal employee conversations where a minor quality issue doesn't carry the same weight as a customer-facing call. Kind of similar to what we were talking about in terms of platform and moving infrastructure. So, Robin, why do you think integration capabilities stand out as the top driver for UCaaS satisfaction?
I mean, I think that's pretty straightforward. I think that right now we're just trying to automate more workflows, make people more productive. So integration, I think, is just crucial. And AI is helping those workflow automations, and that's coming into every area of our lives. So I think integrating collaboration applications with task management tools, for example, is one area we're seeing. AI can automatically enter the tasks for people. So all of those types of things, all those integration capabilities definitely, are important as we just try and make people more productive.
Mm-hmm. And there just frankly aren't a lot of calls on UCaaS. I mean, truly, the calls are in the contact center. The calls are customer.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The calls are customer facing. Now, if you have someone on a UCaaS platform that's doing like credit and collections, and they happen to be on UCaaS because that's what their technology department said they should use instead of a Genesys system, they're using Microsoft Teams, then they're going to have some decent call volume. They're actually going to care about call quality. But that's going to be the minority of the use cases. The majority of the use cases are people like us that have corporate phone numbers, and we've been mandated to have one because of some corporate policy or whatever it is, or every so often someone wants to call us. But there's just not a lot of traffic on those. I mean, the calls just aren't really there on the volume.
Do you agree, kind of on that same line, do you agree that the stakes are just different between the internal UCaaS calls from a quality
it's
standpoint?
pretty different. It's pretty different. I mean, at AVOXI, we support the UCaaS market because our customers ask us to help them there. But our primary market is contact center. And I would say, well, that's who cares about the calls. So we want to make calls really good. We really care about stability and uptime and quality and all those things and coverage. And in the UCaaS world, the coverage is important for sure. And the calls don't need to be, they need to work, but they are just not as critical as the contact center side.
That sparkling, crystal clear quality is not as
But
important.
on our platform, you get good quality with both because it's the same as that platform. So that's positive. That's positive for people.
Yes. All right. Well, when we look at how enterprises purchase voice within UCaaS, the picture is more fragmented compared to CCaaS. More than half of the organizations, about 52%, source voice directly from their UCaaS provider, and nearly as many, around 50%, still turn to global or local telecom carriers, and a substantial 40% use a specialty global voice provider. When asked about that primary provider, the market is very closely split. UCaaS providers lead with about 26%, telecom carriers at about 24%, and both on-prem UC providers and specialty providers come in at about 19% each. So it shows there's no real single dominant model. Enterprises are mixing and matching different approaches based on their needs. So Robin, do you think the UCaaS voice landscape, why do you think the UCaaS voice landscape is more fragmented compared to CCaaS?
Well, I mean, certainly when you look at voice services for the UCaaS side of things, there's a lot of IT people involved in this decision making, a lot of just like regular telco contracts, and I think you've got a lot of multiple sourcing models. Whereas in the CX world, in the contact center world, it's all got to be very, very well orchestrated. Because we're talking customers again. We have to really be careful about what we're doing in the contact center and how customers perceive things. We want as much consistency as we can. I also see that some companies, when it comes to just their internal UC, they decentralize some of those decisions about internal communications, and people in country are making the decisions about the purchase versus having that centralized. I don't think that's the right strategy, but I just see it happen. You certainly see this developing over with merger and acquisition. And if their priority, like I was talking about earlier, if their priority is to consolidate after that merger and acquisition with the contact center, because that's customer facing, over UC, then UC is going to kind of stay in that mode where it's more fragmented longer and longer, and other priorities might just bump it down because they're not having any problems with it. Whereas in the contact center world, you might really start seeing some problems with that fragmented approach, and you don't want to ever have any problems with anything customer facing.
Right.
Barbara, can you talk about the trade-offs between buying voice directly from a UCaaS provider versus using the telecom carriers or specialty voice providers?
Yeah, I think the UCaaS buying model is really interesting. I mean, most cloud-based UCaaS is really launched with some type of a cloud voice marketplace. Most of those marketplaces had two things in them. One, they had packages that were kind of built by the UCaaS provider. And then the second thing is they had country-specific traditional telecommunication carrier links where you could buy voice services direct from each carrier by country. So those two things are kind of like traditional ways to buy voice. So that to me caused some of these trends that you see here. But now what we're seeing in the market is we're seeing customers say, oh gosh, how much am I actually spending on these voice services? And do I actually really have the number types I need? Do I really have the coverage I need? Can I optimize this now that I'm through with the majority of my migration, or now that we know a little bit more about how to integrate into these platforms better? So I feel like that's going to evolve over time, just like we've seen CCaaS evolve as enterprises take more control over their infrastructure.
Looking ahead, change is clearly on the horizon for UCaaS voice, similar to the expectations with CCaaS. Nearly 79% of organizations expect their needs to change within the next 1 to 2 years, driven by requirements like new number types or expanded global coverage. For 40% of respondents, those needs will trigger a shift to a new preferred provider. And much like what we saw in CCaaS, specialty global voice providers came out on top. 1/3 or 34% expect to select a specialty provider, with the main drivers being greater control and the ability to better leverage AI. That preference outpaces UCaaS providers, carriers, and APIs. Barbara, with specialty providers on top again here, what do they deliver that UCaaS platforms or carriers don't?
Right. So number one thing is a specialty global voice provider, if you have a platform like the AVOXI platform, means you get to have one provider for all of your countries. So you get to do one contract, one service model, one set of integrations, one method to interact with this communication. You also get to leverage all of your buying power in one place for your voice channel. So that's really probably one main benefit that you get there. And then the second thing you get is you really just get access to a platform that you can then orchestrate all of your voice services in the cloud. And so then you have visibility on the quality, you have visibility on the coverage, you can actually see how many calls you have, you can route calls. If you have a back office center in Japan and there's a tsunami there, you can actually reroute all their phone calls instantly to another location. And you can have some disaster recovery capabilities because you have a routing engine based into your platform. So there's a lot of capabilities there that I think as our customers move to the cloud, they're sort of their first step is to go with one provider and have a better operating model. And then the next step is really how do we optimize that and orchestrate that in the cloud now that we've digitized that workflow. So those to me are probably the top two benefits they can get.
Mm-hmm. And Robin, kind of a similar question to what I asked in the CCaaS portion. Do you expect this move to specialty providers to accelerate, or do you think some companies will stick with sort of bundled UCaaS voice?
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on their priorities. Michelle, kind of like what you were saying, if they want greater control or the ability to leverage AI, then it would make sense to consider a specialty provider, particularly because of what Barbara was just saying, like having that platform approach with the visibility. I think that analytics, the visibility, that's all very important. So that would make sense. And like I said before, if they just, if they roll out a voice with a specialty provider, even to like a few challenging regions, just to see the benefit, I think then it's going to really start accelerating quickly. I also think AI is going to drive this in another way. So when you think about how companies are investing in AI right now, and it's very heavy, 85% of companies this year increased their spending in AI by about 25%. So it's a big jump. If that foundation is not strong, these projects will fail. So right. If the network is not strong, if the cloud is not strong, if the security is not strong, any foundational capability that all this AI is sitting on top of, that's going to fail. And I would tell you, companies are not willing to absorb that cost, either, hard dollar cost or human cost, because it's a lot of focus being placed there. And, you look about like right now, about 86% of companies right now are saying that their bots and their humans, their AI agents, their human agents are working together. So whether it's bot to human in the contact center, or whether it's bot to human just internally in a company, in a UC environment, this has now become a crucial thing. So I think when you look at specialty providers, they're going to better enable that bot to human routing capability over the platform. I think that there's going to be good visibility into that, and that's going to be really crucial moving forward.
We're at our time for today. So before we close out, let's just talk about any strategic recommendations or any other implications this might have from your perspectives. Do you have any final thoughts to share, Robin or Barbara?
Go ahead, Barbara.
Sure. All right. I guess I would say there's a lot of options now in how to manage your voice channel, whether you have a UCaaS or CCaaS platform. So, taking on doing a proof of concept or a pilot or a trial is always a good way to see what options are going to work best for you. And you're taking a look at a few different vendors and platforms so you understand what's out there and how different folks operate. So you can make the best decision for this part of your tech stack, and that'll take you into the future.
Yeah, I would just say, I want to reiterate what I was talking about with the foundation. I think a lot of companies sort of jump to doing more than they should be before they have their foundation really secured and really, I don't mean like security. I mean like firm, like their foundation is non-breakable. And that includes things like your network, that includes your services, that includes your data. So there's all sorts of things that you need to do at the foundational level before you start, doing more with AI, with CX, with UC, with new applications. So the other thing I would say that I feel very strongly about is that you always have to be measure your success.
Right.
Make sure you know what metrics you're looking at, have the tools to measure, and make sure that what's happening is good, it's improving, you're not seeing problems. And if you are, then you need to fix them.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for that. I think it's clear that the platform choices aren't just about today. They define how ready organizations will be for the upcoming challenges of tomorrow in terms of quality, compliance, and AI. So I'm going to conclude today's session. I'd like to thank both of our speakers, Robin and Barbara, for their time, and thank you to our listeners as well. Feel free to reach out with any questions or for more information about the research. And don't forget to check out the other videos in the series where we'll explore data around topics including the most persistent international voice challenges and AI for global voice. See you next time.